Hey, we are now live. Hey, thanks for joining us if you are joining us on this live broadcast. And I'm here talking with Andy Luttrell about this fantastic book, Psychology for the Mentalist. This is an amazing, amazing book. If you haven't already checked it out, this came out in 2015. Can you believe it's been years since we did this book? And I'm here live with Andy. He's on the call. Say hello to everybody.
Hello to everybody.
Fantastic. So a lot has happened in 2 years with this book. This book has gone all over the world. It's gotten rave reviews from pretty much everybody who's read it. And if it hasn't gotten rave reviews, I haven't heard about them. So anybody who reads this book has always had phenomenal things to say about it. And I think it was destined to be an instant classic, and I now think it is an instant classic. So Andy, could you tell us, what is this book? What is your elevator pitch? Tell us about the book.
Well, the first thing you mentioned, the feedback, and I think it's been really humbling for me over the last couple of years to get feedback from people who for a long time were idols of mine, saying positive things about the book. So it's been super humbling and super gratifying to see the attention that the book has gotten. But the elevator pitch, I've already probably gone to the floor that I needed to go to. So I'll restart and do the elevator pitch from the beginning. The book is basically the science of psychology applied to the art of mentalism. So my training, I recently finished my PhD in social psychology, so I've spent lots of time digging through all corners of that world and teaching students both online, in the classroom, through written pieces, etc., to try to boil down some key concepts that are based in the science of psychology that I thought could have a lot to do with mentalism performance, both in provoking thoughts for new methods and in provoking thoughts for interesting presentations. So that's the bulk of the book. Is super well cited. I think it's probably one of the longest references sections for a magic book, at least in a long time. And so lots of studies cited to hopefully give you insight into something that we can trust is likely to give you some impact.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of good stuff. Oh, I start talking, it's right on my face. This Google Hangouts is crazy. There's so much packed into this book. What could a reader who hasn't yet picked this up, and I know a lot of folks have, and a lot of people I know after watching this will probably even go back and reread it again, because it's a very rereadable book. Every time you pick it up, I feel like every time I've picked it up, I've noticed something new. Or I go, oh man, I hadn't thought about that concept because it didn't apply necessarily to something that I was working on at the time, but now it does. So I go, oh hey, there's that. But I like to tell people that this is a crash course in social psychology. So if you want to sort of skip all of those, sifting through all the textbooks that have the information that applies to what we do as mentalists, or even just magicians and performers, Andy has done all the work, or rather you have done all the work. I'm speaking to the audience. Sorry. Andy has done all the work for us in terms of sifting through all the relevant things and really thinking about them, picking them apart and applying them and making them fit the mold of the performer. Because if you pick up a social psychology textbook, you're going to find a lot of stuff that just probably won't be interesting to you because it doesn't have anything to do with what we do as performers on stage, or in terms of really manipulating our audience or whatnot. And of course, if you are an expert in mentalism, and especially if you play the psychology angle, and even if you don't, this will make you seem even more like an expert. And I say seem because not all of us are experts, but we certainly pretend to be, don't we? Andy is an expert because he literally has PhD in this stuff. So thank you, by the way, Andy, for making us all look better than we already did, just by putting that all together. Do you have, I mean, I know it's been 2 years since this has come out, which means it's been even longer since you've even probably really gone through exactly what's in here. Is there any standout parts of this book that you think are a must? In other words, don't just sort of flip or skip over that or skim it lightly, but actually that needs to really be delved into and analyzed and picked apart.
Oh, that's putting me on the spot. I know. So one thing I like about how the book came together is that it's very, there's a lot there, but it's broken into very manageable chunks, right? So every chapter, call it a chapter, is 2 to 5 pages long in a lot of cases. And so you can sort of just jump right in and sort of take a little section, think about it, how it might apply to something that you do. So in that way, it can kind of sit on your table, sit on your desk, and you can return to it if you want. But within there, I think I'm really proud of a couple of chapters that I sort of dove all the way into a topic and sort of really kind of gave all that we know about a particular thing that's especially relevant to the way mentalism is often performed. One of those is a section on lie detection. So I dug into a lot of like, what does science actually say about lie detection? Can we predict it? What kinds of things improve accuracy, and can it be improved at all? So there's lots of stuff to deal with in there. And then there's a section on subliminal influence, which is a common ploy in mentalism. And so my idea was, well, let's see what the science has to say. Can we actually do things like this? And how should we present, perhaps, those kinds of routines, knowing what the science currently says about it?
Can you give us some insight on what the science currently says about it for the folks who haven't read the book, or maybe some who just don't remember because they skipped it?
Yeah, so the subliminal stuff is a little disheartening because most of what we know is that it doesn't tend to do a whole lot.
Isn't that
but the interesting thing about it is that there are lots of cases in the literature where subliminal presentation of information has an effect, but it tends to be real subtle, right? And the interesting thing is that when they've done meta-analyses, which are analyses that pile together tons and tons of studies to see, okay, across all 30 of these studies, what can we learn about subliminal influence? What you tend to find is that there is a reliable effect of subliminal stimuli, but it's so small. And the explanation for it is that you live in a world where everything else is competing for your attention, right? How could something subliminal have any chance of sneaking in when you're bombarded by a ton of conscious stimuli all the time? So that even that in and of itself is an interesting thing to think about, to present that as sort of something that works against you being able to pull off the kind of routine that you're trying to do, right? You can make the case that the evidence shows that it's possible, but there are all these other things getting in the way. But I'm going to show you that if it's done strategically, it can have a real impact, right? So that's an example of how you can take what the science actually says and use it to kind of make what you do look even more impressive.
Absolutely. And I'm just making this go over to my website right now, the patrickredford.com. That should be popping up on your screen at the moment. But this is where you can get the book. If you don't already have the book, you can get it in 2 different formats. We've decided to release this in both ebook form and physical book form. So it is, there's a price breakdown there. It's currently on sale over at the site. However, if you buy this soon, there is a coupon code, which is psychology411, and you will get a percentage off the book when you add it to your cart and insert psychology411. So that's very, very exciting there. You can go do that at patrickredford.com. And by the way, this is what the book actually looks like in real life. And I have a bookmark. And what do I have bookmarked in mine? I should probably look at that. What did I bookmark?
Yeah, I'm curious too.
Oh, Scribbly-Doo. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Scribble-dee-doo. Scribble-dee-doo. One of the effects in the book, which I will keep my mouth shut about. Actually, Scribble-dee-doo is a really, really neat technique that, how much should I say about it, Andy?
Well, so I think it's a good example of the kinds of effects that are in there, which is that there aren't a lot of like full out routines, but that's an effect that I think is, it's not going to revolutionize mentalism, right, as a method, but it's a subtlety that's based on some of the research that I've done on the literature that's out there, that I think when I've applied it to a book test, so you can apply it to a book test, any kind of, again, I don't know how much to say about it, but I think that the version I have in there is a card prediction kind of a thing. Just a little subtlety that makes it seem like the actual method couldn't have possibly been the actual method.
And you talked briefly about doing it with a book test in either the chapter, as you call it, let's get this back on my face. In the chapter that you call it just before that, which is just a few paragraphs above that, if I'm remembering correctly, and skimming as I'm talking, because I didn't know why I even bookmarked that. But that's a great example of the type of stuff that is in this book. So again, what you're getting with Psychology for the Mentalist is not full-blown effects. It is subtleties and additions and techniques. So if you're familiar with Banachek's Psychological Subtleties series, you know that is full of little touches and things that you can pepper throughout your work to make what you do even better and even stronger. This book is like the college textbook version of that work. But we're not, Andy doesn't spoon feed a bunch of routines at you like the sequels to Psychology, the sequels to Psychological Subtleties, there we go, do, because it's more akin to the first volume, but with cited papers and actual research to back it up and actual science backing it up. Not to say that the stuff in Psychological Subtleties isn't sound thinking. Some of it just says, well, this works because it does, and sometimes it works for some people and sometimes it doesn't work for other people, because that sort of thing, that sort of psychology that has been put into magic books in the past is can be very regional specific, where it will work for some people some of the time, and sometimes other people it won't work for. This goes further than that. This isn't, hey, this might work,
or it worked for me once.
because I did it 5 times and it happened to work. This works because of this study. This works because we took this sampling of people and we tried this out. And isn't this an interesting idea? Now, how can we apply it to what we do? And as far as I know, no other book on the market has taken this approach until Andy did it. So thank you, Andy, for that.
If I can go ahead and throw out one idea, the way that got me thinking. So at the end of the book, I don't know if it's labeled an appendix or something, but there's data that I collected that can inform things like psychological forces. And I just want to throw it out, anyone who happens to be listening, there are some data in the back about when people imagine rolling a die, what number do they tend to think comes up? And there's a pattern to those numbers that I think is really intriguing, and I never worked out any actual application of that. But if any of the sharp minds out there are able to use those patterns and sort of work out some interesting psychological force or propless mentalism routine, I think there's something in there that might be useful.
Yeah, the propless mentalism is extremely popular, especially at the moment with some of the new releases that have just hit the market. But specifically, the thing that Andy was just talking about is on page 207. It's called the Die Hard Psychological Force, and he goes through some very brief ideas. And I remember, actually, now that I'm remembering, about 2 years ago, we talked specifically about this because there was a routine that I had in my notes. I still have never put it out, on forcing the roll of 2 invisible dies and having that predicted on the card. And if I recall, I think I did it for you, and I think I fooled you with it.
I would admit to it if I remembered, but I don't remember
how it's done at this point. I'd have to go through my notebooks and look it up. So I remember you solved a small problem that the routine had, and that's probably worth revisiting at this point. Completely slipped my mind altogether. But there's also sort of the frequencies in which things are named. So, for example, on page 205, there's a vegetable table there, and now everybody's freezing the frame. So I'm moving around a little bit, but I'm sure that's okay with you, even if they do. Where it tells you the frequency of how often each sort of choices are named. Of course, it's not a definitive list because this would be a huge book because there's a lot of that out there. But so what is it? The top? How many are there? 3, 6, 9, 12, about a dozen different choices there that people choose. Really, there's only 3 that people do go for.
And if anyone's read Psychology of the Psychic, it came out in the 70s, I think, at the height of like Uri Geller stuff. And they had an appendix that was basically like this, where a lot of the forces that we know of, like the 7 force or those sorts of things, were sort of rooted in those data. And I thought, well, that was 30 years ago. Time for an update. Do people tend to think differently? But I think the 7 force is borne out in those numbers as well.
I believe they are. And another good resource for that sort of thinking is the book Mind Hacks. It's in that series. I don't know if it's the Mind Hacks book or the Mind Performance Hacks or there's a whole series of those books. I don't know if you're familiar with those yourself, but they're full of tables of that nature, which are rich for the sort of thing that we do. By the way, we are up to 7 viewers. Oh, we're up to 6 viewers. So apparently I said something that folks just don't want to hear about. But anyway, we have about 10 more minutes with you on this call before we have to let you go. So thanks so much for spending the time. I know you're a busy guy. You have a few projects that you have worked on that I'd like to talk about. You have a wonderful YouTube channel. Do you still keep that up to date? Because I know that you were doing some wonderful things on that YouTube channel. Can you talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, so most recent video was from May, I think. So I took a summer hiatus. Mostly because I've been moving, so I had to kind of break down the studio that I used to make those videos, and I haven't quite had a chance to put it back together again. But yeah, those should be coming back in September or so, as regularly as I can do them. I'd love to keep to the every other week schedule that I had for a while, but they take some time to make. I always forget how much time those take. But the idea is to present in about a 5-minute video some sort of quick, snappy intro to some idea in social psychology or some studies in social psychology. And oftentimes I play with whatever the themes of the day happen to be. So I did a series of like 3 Christmas-related ones over the holiday. But otherwise, questions like what is social psychology, or certain kinds of terms that you might have heard before, like cognitive dissonance, but don't really know quite the details about. So yeah, so more of those should be coming.
So that leads me to my next question for you. There's a series of books that Banachek did. Will there be a series of Psychology for the Mentalist, or is this all you have to say for now?
So it's interesting that you said.
I just sprung that on you. I didn't even tell you that was going to come out, did I?
You reminded me that this came out 2 years ago, but I think I started writing the book in 2012, probably. So it was a very long, drawn-out process of sort of every once in a while putting one of those chapters together, bridging things together. Because I think when you do have to be really true to the empirical research, it takes longer because you can't just say whatever you think at the moment. So it took a while, and there's a lot of new stuff on my plate these days. So I wouldn't wait too long. I wouldn't wait very much, I guess I'm saying, for a sequel.
But we can wait, can't we?
You can wait. One thing you can do is, and I also am taking a brief hiatus, but I do have a blog that is more regularly updated. And even though there aren't direct applications to mentalism, if what you're interested in is social psychology in digestible format, that would be a way to do it. So if you go to beapeopleexpert.com, that is my social psychology for the public website, where I try to write as regularly as I can. On a good month, it's every week. On a bad month, it's every month. But new stuff as frequently as I can.
You sound like my working schedule there. Well, we're just going to wrap this up in just a few minutes, but I want to thank you again for hopping on this and revisiting Psychology for the Mentalist. And by the way, if you are just joining us, I want to remind you that you can get the discount code. So if you go over to patrickredford.com and you want to order Psychology for the Mentalist, you can do that, but make sure you put in Psychology 411 at checkout for a nice little, hey, thanks for joining us, little discount there in your cart. Save you some cash. And again, it is available as an ebook, and as well as the hardcover book. You can get it bundled together, save a little bit of money that way. But a lot of people I know love ebooks nowadays, because I get tons of emails saying, hey, when is such and such of your work going to be an ebook? And the answer is, I've got a garage full of books to get rid of. So when they're gone, then maybe. But fortunately, Psychology for the Mentalist is available as an ebook now, and you can have it now. You can have it in seconds, or however fast your download speed happens to go. I'd like to ask, is there a favorite favorite routine, favorite tidbit, favorite technique in this book that is your go-to, is your lifesaver, is your something that you are the most proud of? Do you have a favorite thing in here that we should gravitate towards?
Yeah, so there's toward the beginning, and it's been a little while since I've looked at it, so I don't know exactly where it is, but within the first, I'm going to ballpark it 30 pages. There's a routine that uses a subtlety of projecting a thought from a participant to the audience. So basically, the audience is able to read the mind of the person on stage. And that's gotten a lot of great attention. So I've gotten a lot of great feedback from people on that in particular. And people have told me that they've put that into other routines or taken that idea and tweaked it a bit. But that, I think, I'm really proud of it because it's very simple, but there are layers to it that kind of cover up the deception in a way that removes you entirely. So it doesn't make any sense how it could have happened because you seem to have no insight into what the thought was to begin with.
I'm a little bummed that you mentioned that because it's one of my favorite things out of the book as well. But hey, I asked the question, you answered honestly. That's all that matters. But I know we have to let you go in about 5 minutes or less, so I'm just going to try to wrap this up and give you last word on anything you want to say about this wonderful book. It's all you, man.
Yeah, I don't know. What else is there to say? Again, it's been a little bit since it came out, so I'm having some trouble recollecting all the things that were in there.
Well, now in the defense, though, this is a really thick book with a lot of information in it. This is not a Mickey Mouse publication by any means, and that can be seen just by going to the last, from what was it, page 213 to page 240 is your reference list on all of the papers that you've pulled from. In fact, here, I'll hold this up so that it can be like, so these are all the references from all of this on all different things that have been drawn from and the research that has gone into this book. It's all there. So there is a ton in here.
Yeah, so one thing that reminds me that what I was going to say is that I think oftentimes in mentalism, I see, because there is such a clear relationship between mentalism and psychology, right? Almost, in a sense, there's no reason to keep them separate, right? They are, the performance of mentalism is a case of psychology. And so oftentimes people ask for those kinds of resources. And as you mentioned earlier, people will say, well, just go get a textbook from a used bookstore. But I listen, as a social psychology professor, I recommend that, but not if you want to just use it for mentalism.
Absolutely.
Because there's going to be so much more there than you'll likely be interested in. And the other thing that can happen is people will recommend things that aren't really very well founded. So they'll sort of, if it has to do with the mind or behavior, they'll recommend it. There are persuasion books.
You go to any used bookstore and you can go to that section and go, 90% of this is crap, isn't it?
Yeah, and a lot of stuff in like marketing persuasion, because that's my bread and butter. Like my research is on the psychology of persuasion, and there is maybe some insight to be gained from a few case studies, but I'm hard pressed to say that you should really double down on those sorts of things. So this contribution, I think, is very distinctly from my perspective of like, let's look at what the data say. Let's draw conclusions as strongly as we can for now, but let's also look at the stuff that's relevant to performance, right? And use it as a launch pad for our own novel thinking going forward.
Fantastic. Well, hey, I want to thank you again for just doing this sort of follow-up
2
years later on the Psychology of Mentalist. Yeah. And folks, the other video that we did when this book first came out is still up there on the internet. It's a long interview full of broadband blips and but there's a lot of good information there as well. So if you want to find out more and you're craving a longer talk about this book, go seek out that video if you haven't seen it already. And I'm realizing I'm talking and it wasn't on my face. So we're still learning years later how to do a live broadcast and how to do this. But in my defense, Google has changed their interface entirely, and so has YouTube. So it's a little bit different than it was the first time we did this. But anyway, Andy, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks so much for having this book out there. and letting us consume and pick your brain and learn in a much easier way than we would have had to before this book existed. So thank you very much for writing Psychology for the Mentalist. And I wrote this in the foreword. This is a book I wish I would have sat down to write, and I'm so glad you did it. So I didn't have to.
Thanks. And if anyone listening has ideas from any of those things in the book, reach out. I love hearing from people who've implemented these kinds of things.
Absolutely. And how can people get in touch with you direct? Can they go to the website? That's
probably the best way to do it. So beapeopleexpert.com. You can also go to andyluttrell.com. That'll take you to my academic website, but email address will be on there. You can get in touch that way.
Perfect. Well, thank you again so very much.
Yeah.
And thank you both for tuning in and taking the time to watch. We'll see you the next time.